Hey guys, Max92 and welcome back to another tryout. Today's tryout is on Crash Bandicoot Sane Trilogy. This being the last episode before Christmas, this is technically my Christmas special. I got a Christmas shirt, red and green going on here. So it's also the first episode where I'll be using footage that I captured via my capture card from the PS5 rather than using the internal capture stuff. So I just now have a long enough HDMI cable to do that. I played Crash Bandicoot as a kid on the PlayStation 1, but I don't think I ever actually had those games for the PlayStation 1. I just sort of played them elsewhere. I might have, I don't remember. I don't have any of my old PlayStation 1 stuff really anymore. So I don't remember what exactly I had, but I do have this, the Crash Super Pack. This is Crash 2 Entranced and the Game Boy Advanced version of Nitro Kart, which both, that Crash 2 is a sequel to the Game Boy. It's the second Game Boy Advance Crash. I had those, and I've played those a bit more, but it's been a long time since I've really played Crash on console, and rather than this handheld version. I had intended to do a video on Crash 4, but I didn't have it. I thought I did because it was a PlayStation Plus game, but for whatever reason, we just missed that month, and so I didn't have it, but I did have access to the Sane Trilogy, and I played it on the PS5 with the PS4 copy via the PS5's backwards compatibility, and I decided I was going to do a little bit on each of the games, because I don't think I could do an episode on one of them, but this is already a special. It's a Christmas special, so I might as well talk about all three. Maybe it's a bit of a longer video. I played each game for a little over 30 minutes, basically. I played up through the first boss of each of the games, just to get a little bit of a feel on how the game progresses and that sort of stuff. And that's where I'm speaking from, is 30 to 40 minutes-ish. My total playtime across all three games was about 2 hours. And I've beaten the first boss in each game.
It's Crash Bandicoot!
So obviously I started with Crash 1, and it's easy to forget that the Crash Bandicoot games are actually sort of on the more difficult side of the sort of mascot platformers that we had back in that time period. It's not just like there's a higher skill ceiling. I think the skill floor for Crash Bandicoot is also a bit higher than, say, a Mario 64. I think that's a bit more of an entry-level 3D platformer, and Crash is just a bit more difficult. I wouldn't say it's like the Dark Souls or what. It's just a bit more difficult, especially if you're trying to do the more advanced stuff, like 100% the game. I think that's far more difficult than doing it in, say, Super Mario 64 or whatever. And one of the things that I think contributes to that is that camera angle that you get when playing Crash Bandicoot. It's a static camera angle, you're following behind Crash, and because of how they do that, and because of how the level design can be laid out, they can get pretty devious with how they place pits behind hills and stuff like that. And it gives it a bit more of a trial and error type of feel to learning how to play the game and how the game is going to sort of challenge you. And so you fall into a pit behind a hill for the first time, and you're like, oh, they're gonna hide pits from me like that. Okay, so I gotta be careful. I gotta think a bit more actively about what's going to come in front of me. And that might manifest as being more cautious on a first playthrough until you've learned things and that sort of stuff. But I think that's sort of, it's just there's a bit more difficulty to Crash Bandicoot than I think the other mascot platformers from that time period. Something I noticed very quickly while playing, and this could be a combination of things, is that something just sort of felt off about the controls. There's a variety of things that could be. One, I have iffy depth perception, so it might just be that. Two, playing through the capture card, there might be a bit more input delay than I expect. And also it just might be that this does have a different sort of control feel than the original games, and so I might just have very, very old muscle memory on how that felt, and this is not matching up to that because it's different. The main thing that I'm picked out from it is that I feel like Crash feels heavier than what I remember. I'll jump for something and I just fall a bit sooner than I expect to. I'd have to be a bit more precise than what I am expecting on a lot of these jumps. games have come a long way, especially in how we like present them in terms of level design and stuff, to where like you can sort of tell that these games are all like remade games for the PlayStation 1. Like there's a lot done to them visually and changing in their controls and that stuff. But like at a core level, it's this like, this was where this kind of level design was in the early 2000s. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually, you know, it's got a very nostalgic feel to it. You've really like, it takes you back a bit to like what games were like back in that time. And it's like, okay, yeah, because as games have gotten bigger and more complicated and stuff, there are less people making games that are this simple. And so sometimes games this simple can be really great. And I think that's still the case with these games. But I think that's sort of like all of my points for Crash 1. It's just sort of, it's very much the first game of the series, and you know, it's setting up a baseline for the other games to build off of, essentially, especially since all these games came out like, it's basically the same, like they came out a year after each other, if I remember correctly. It was like back to back yearly for a couple years.
It's Crash Bandicoot 2. Cortex strikes back.
So the first thing you'll notice when you get into Crash 2 is that there's a couple new movement options. You have a slide, you've got a crouch, and you've got a ground pound that aren't in the first game. And it adds this little more dimension to your movement, a little more that you can do. Especially when you can, like, when you slide and you jump, I think you get like you get a different jump animation and stuff like that. And then the next thing you'll notice is that the level select in Crash 2 is more what I remember as like the classic level hub for the Crash Bandicoot games, where you've got, you know, that area where you walk around and all the levels are on the walls and stuff like that. That's more what like I remember the level select in Crash Bandicoot being like. It's not like that in the first game or the third game, so it's sort of like, I guess this is a specific to this one game thing, but like it just feels, you know, unique to Crash Bandicoot to an extent. Crash 2 basically builds upon the difficulty of Crash 1, and I'm assuming Crash 1 gets harder as it goes on, but Crash 2 starts out harder than Crash 1, with how the enemies can't be killed in the way that you would kill them in Crash 1 just by spinning them. You have to jump on some of them first and spin them. Some of them you can't jump on, and so you have to really like pay attention to what you're fighting and act accordingly. And I think the platforming in Crash 2 is a bit more precise than it is in Crash 1. They're expecting a little bit more from your ability to platform around the game because they're assuming you have finished the first game in some capacity. Since it's the same basic engine and stuff, there's still something that feels off. It's still that same like heaviness that Crash has, but I think it's alleviated a little bit by the new movement stuff, where you have new ways to interact with your environment. Crash 2 is definitely an evolution from what they did with the first game. They're sort of building off of the ideas, because they were so close together, they're just sort of like building off of the ideas that already were there and adding things to make it a bit more, just like a bit more to the whole feel of the thing. And it really, you can tell by playing these games back to back how the game series evolves a bit. Due to the faithfulness of these remakes, these games all really have that classic feel, like I was mentioning. They feel like they're made on the PlayStation 1, but it's a sort of nostalgic thing, and it's also like the simplicity of the games is very classic feeling, and it's kind of refreshing in some ways in a day where everything is huge. I've been playing God of War recently, and it's like there's just so much to that game, and you come back to Crash Bandicoot and it's just very simple and straightforward. It's good to have a mix of these things in the industry, and I like to see, you know, people make games like a Crash Bandicoot when they come out, and it's like, hey, that's, you know, that's very classic feeling, and it's really nice to see that be here still, even when we have things that are huge, your God of War, your Elden Ring, these big, massive games with these high budgets. And then you can also have Crash Bandicoot. And these things can coexist because they're not necessarily seeking the same exact audience, and they're also just very different pieces of art, and you can appreciate them like that. as very different pieces of art. But that's, I think, all I have to say about Crash 2 here. So let's get on to the next game.
It's Crash Bandicoot Warped!
Crash 3, or Crash Bandicoot Warped, as is the actual title, it really feels like a culmination of everything that they did across the previous 2 games. Except Tana. Tana is basically gone after the first game. I think I read on the wiki she has like a little cameo in a picture in Crash's house. And if I can find it, I'll put a footage if that's in the footage that I have. But like she's gone basically otherwise. But it does have the varied environments that have grown to be the norm across the game. It's got the vehicle segments that have grown to be a part of the games up to this point. And it's even got multiple characters that you can play as. It's the everything that you kind of remember from Crash on the PlayStation 1, I think, is in Crash Bandicoot Warped. Once again, it's the same engine, so something still sort of feels off to me with Crash being that heavy, but I found that in some level types, if you use the D-pad rather than the analog stick, it can help a little bit with how heavy things can feel and give you a bit more precision to your direction. Something that I believe is new to Crash 3 is that when you beat bosses, you get some sort of new movement ability. After the first boss, it was just sort of a stronger ground pound, but I believe that there's even more things that you get as the game goes on. I don't really remember what they are, but I know that there are more things that you unlock as you play more. It's a really solid game, and I think it's probably the best of the original trilogy of Crash games. Like I mentioned, it's basically a culmination of everything, and I think that while you probably still will want to play the first 2, I think you'll definitely want to play the third. So to wrap this whole video up, let's do some conclusion points about the whole package. Something in this engine feels off to me. I missed a lot of jumps by like a small margin, by like hitting the ledge and sliding off or something. And it's, again, I'm not sure if it's my depth perception or the input lag from using the capture card, or it is just the new movement system that I know is in this game. It sort of makes me want to compare to the older games to see how they feel compared against it. I remember the specifics of the control differences being mentioned in an old Caddicarus video about the Sane Trilogy. So if you want those details, I can put a link to that in the description, I guess, or maybe even a card if that's a thing I'm allowed to do. I think they're over here. If I can put other people's videos in cards, I'll put it in a card. It's probably just something I need to spend some time getting used to so that I can play the game, you know, and it's probably best if you play through the games in order like that to sort of get that feel over the course of all 3 games. So by the time you get to Crash 3, which I think has some of the harder levels in the trilogy, you have a better feel of the whole thing, of that one system. And having them all in this one engine really can help with that, because I think in the original games there are slight differences in movement between each game. The Sane Trilogy is definitely a really great package of these 3 Crash games based on like my 2-ish hours of playtime. I'll probably at least attempt to finish all 3 games, but I don't think it's very likely that I will 100% them, unless I happen just to, over time, get very good at them. Like I said, these games have a high skill ceiling and a higher skill floor, and I don't know that I'm going to want to dedicate the time that it's going to take to really get the game perfected enough for like the time trial stuff and all that. Like I said, I'll probably play more, I'll probably finish it, and that means Game Pass's tryout. I think it's something that if you like Crash Bandicoot or you haven't played Crash Bandicoot, pick this up. It's very accessible. It's on like all modern platforms, and check it out if that's a thing you're into. It's I think it's one of the games that you can play that's like the PS Plus collection for PS5. I think it's in there. So yeah, did I say it passes its tryout? It passes its tryout. I don't know. That's it. And that's the episode, the Christmas special on Crash Bandicoot for some reason. That's really all I had to say about all of that. So if you go in the description, you find a link to my beacons.ai. It's got my Twitter, Patreon, Bandcamp, Redbubble, etc. in there. Click that, do what you do in those places. Like the video if you like it, dislike it if you didn't. Subscribe if you want to keep with this and other shows. I do all sorts of stuff on the channel. And I'll be doing more kinds of stuff as I get it done. So subscribe if you want to see those. Leave a comment. Do you have history with Crash Bandicoot? Have you played this and the original games and can talk at length about the difference in control feel? Leave a comment. Share the video. Do the things. And anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!